Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. We're here today with special guest, Amelia Knott, who's here to share with us her new book, The Art of Thriving Online, a workbook, creative exercises to help you stay grounded and feel joy in the world of social media. Do you wish you could spend less time on social media or maybe even quit it altogether? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. So, Amelia Knott is an art psychotherapist who specializes in mental health impacts of hustle culture and social media. With over a decade of facilitation experience, she offers meaningful mental health care through one-on-one art therapy, group sessions, and workshops. And she also hosts Anti-Hustle Art Studio, a resource for co-working sessions to help others carve out time to care for themselves with creativity. So welcome to the show, Amelia Knott.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh my goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. So what inspired you to write this?
I mean, first and foremost, I think it's such a topical conversation. I think between the things I discuss with my clinical clients as an art therapist, the things I'm talking about with friends and family, and I mean, also just in my own personal life and my relationship with social media. I think it's so universal that so many of us experience this tension in our online lives between, on one hand, feeling like there's a lot of meaning and really usefulness in the digital platforms we use every day, but also at the same time knowing that social media can really harm our mental health. And I think a lot of us are stuck kind of holding this paradox between oftentimes wanting to leave social media, knowing that it can negatively impact us, but then at the same time knowing that it's a real source of community, inspiration. It's often what makes it possible for us to live and work in a digital age. So I think when I approached writing this book, I really wanted to create a resource for people who are kind of holding that paradox, oftentimes wanting to leave but not feeling like they had the choice to. So instead of offering kind of a step-by-step guide that maybe relies on strengthening willpower or even giving the advice to leave the platforms, I think the art of thriving online really is about kind of taking a look at our relationship with social media and finding creative ways to coexist with these technologies and reflecting deeply about what wellness could mean when we choose to stay online, when we choose to live a life that is interwoven with these platforms.
Well, you start off the book talking about digital wellness, and I think for a lot of people that can seem like a little bit of an oxymoron for them when it
Yes.
comes to thinking about wellness and our digital lives. And so how do we get to this place of understanding that there could be wellness there for us?
I mean, I think I'm glad you mentioned the word oxymoron because it's true. And we should say right off the bat that social media apps aren't designed with our psychological well being in mind, right? They are meant to keep us online as long as possible. And that often has the impact of fracturing our attention, making us feel like there's this never ending urgency to stay up to date with the news or be available at all times, right? There's so many reasons that being online can leave us feeling unwell, right? Consuming that amount of information nonstop. And I think in this day and age, finding a way to be in those spaces and feel well. I mean, I know for myself, it's kind of the homework of my life.
Well, I like how in your book you mention that thriving online isn't about trying to spend less time scrolling, it's about maintaining our mental health. So, what does that look like?
Well, I think it looks really different for everybody because all of us use these digital tools in different ways, right? Some of us might be online to maintain relationships with people who are far away. Some of us might need to be online and kind of connected with the news cycle or using these tools for work. So I think it really comes down to the individual ways each of us use them and the ways each of us feel vulnerable online. I mean, I can use myself as an example. most of my work as an art psychotherapist exists in the digital realm and relies on being on social media. So I know for me, digital wellness looks like feeling like I have the chance to step away and have a boundary between my work life and my personal life. It also means kind of cultivating a sense of presence in my body to know when I've been doom scrolling for too long, for example. And I mean, I think the most important part, and this is something that I think a lot of people can benefit from, is having different kinds of creative practices, whether that's art, writing, collage, maybe that's even digital art, as a way of grounding in what's true for us and getting a sense of how we want to express ourselves, what feels authentic and what feels like our own personal voice, right? We're so inundated with, I mean, the word influence comes to mind. We're so influenced by just the torrent of information and opinions we see online. And I really think that for me, digital wellness means having creative practices to return to over and over again, to really stay tethered to myself and the things that feel true and correct for me. So, I mean, in short, I think digital wellness means having ways of returning to ourselves over and over again. And I think art, whether that's again, writing, collaging, making playlists, it could be different for everybody. Those are really ways that we can stay in conversations with ourselves.
I know earlier you mentioned about the work that you do. What are some of the ways that social media really exploits our psychological vulnerabilities?
Gosh, I mean, there's so many ways, right? And something I like to remind clients of when they say, or when they're being hard on themselves for maybe it's hard to put their phone down, is that, every app is designed by teams of behavioral psychologists, right? Giant budgets going towards keeping us online as long as possible. So, I mean, one way that I think a lot of us are familiar with is just how hard it is to actually put the phone down. Things like the endless scroll feature in our For You page means that there's really no end to the content that we could be consuming, right? It's easy to spend hours and hours uh, online and take our attention away from the things that we might want to be spending our attention on. That's one way. I mean, another common one I think a lot of us are familiar with is just how algorithms really reward the most inflammatory messages, right? We see a lot of fear and anger on social media platforms, and that's because those are the things that we're most likely to engage with, right? It's not necessarily that the world is getting scarier and angrier. It's that a headline that uses perhaps really scary or inflammatory language is likely to perform well. So the digital landscape most of us inhabit is one that is really shaped by fear, by division, by stoking conflict between people. So I think that's another place. If we're feeling angry or anxious, it's because those types of rhetorics really thrive in digital space.
So, how do we go about cultivating a new relationship with social media?
I guess the first place my brain goes is that so many of us use these tools really passively, right? And let the app or the algorithm determine the tone of that relationship. And that's pretty disempowering, right? I think what creating a new relationship with social media could mean or look like for a lot of people is remembering that we also have agency, right? We get to make some decisions about how we show up, what we see, what we don't see. And that's not true in every aspect of our digital lives, but I think first of all remembering one that we have some choice and can make decisions about how we engage in digital space that really work for us and what we need for our own mental health. That's a huge important one. And then, I mean, the other piece that I think is so important, especially when shame creeps in, is remembering that it's not, I think, a personal failing when we struggle to use these tools. A quote that really stays with me is it's not your fault for falling into a trap that was set for you. And I think a lot of the self-help rhetoric around digital wellness really relies on a question of strengthening our willpower or finding the perfect set of digital habits to to use these tools in a way that is correct. And I think that really shifts the blame onto the user. And I think what's really useful for a lot of people is remembering that these tools are working exactly as they're designed, right? It's not a moral failing or a personal failing. If we're challenged by regulating our time online, or if it's hard to put our phone down, it's because we're interfacing with a system and entire industries that are invested in us spending as much time online as possible. So I think something I really try and do in the book is call truth to power and illuminate the places where the cards are really stacked against us so that we can kind of lift that shame from ourselves and realize that, first of all, collectively, everyone is experiencing some version of this tension on social media, and that it's not necessarily our fault individually when it's hard to feel well when we're scrolling or when we're spending hours and hours in front of a screen every day.
You have so many resources within this book. One of them I really had fun with was the doodle graph.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite activities as well. And for context, that's in the first chapter about attention, where there's a chart of the hours of the day, and you get to make a doodle of the fluctuating frontier of your attention. Like, where in your day do you find you have more attention and more perhaps ability to direct your attention where you want? And where in your day might that get more complicated? Like for me, for example, I find the mornings are usually when I have good periods of focus, but after, say, a couple of hours of seeing clients or working really diligently, I find it really tough to hold my attention in one place. And what I find useful about that kind of activity is we get to use something visual to chart that out. Oftentimes I find when we go into a creative process, we might have an idea of where it's going to go, but then stepping back and looking at, say, a doodle of our attention, we might learn something new about our experience that comes from the visual expression, not just what we know in a cognitive or analytical way.
So, what are some hacks that kind of help people pay attention to the amount of attention they're giving to social media? I mean, should they get like an alarm clock so that they're not looking at their phone? What are some of the hacks they can use?
I mean, again, I think it's really individual. I know for myself, I'm a person with ADHD, so attention is already something that I struggle to regulate. For some people, it might be enough to kind of track the number of hours a day they spend online. For other people, like myself included, I actually have an app on my phone that will lock me out at 9 p.m. I really need to outsource that willpower to something else. So I'm not making the decision for myself every day when it's time to wind down and go to bed. So I think looking for ways that you can outsource when you need a little bit of extra help is really useful. And then also things that just help us bring into awareness what we're actually doing with our time online. And again, this is where I think using visual tools or having creative activities is really useful because it's not just theoretical, right? We might get to see in front of us what our attention looks like or what the hours of the day look like in color, in line, in shape. And that just gives us another way of reflecting and engaging with that information. And from there, we can decide how we might like to change it, what we might like to do differently.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Amelia Knott in regards to her new book, The Art of Thriving Online, a Workbook. Creative exercises to help you stay grounded and feel joy in the world of social media. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Are you an author, speaker, or expert who is looking for more publicity? Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up for free interview requests from shows looking for guests. Radio Guest List is the #1 free booking resource for radio, podcasts, and TV talk shows who are looking for experts like you right now. Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up today to get the visibility you deserve.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special. When you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place, here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
It's one thing to become attached to your perfect home, but what do you do when that home becomes attached to you? A family in dire need of a fresh start, a mysterious house tied to the past. Buried deep within the foundation of the old Far Hill Manor lies a centuries-old secret. Dark forces or something stronger just waiting to be discovered. Caretaker, a supernatural thriller by breakout authors R.J. Halpert.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest, Amelia Knott, who's here sharing with us her new book, The Art of Thriving Online, a workbook. Creative exercises to help you stay grounded and feel joy in the world of social media. How does your book go beyond the traditional detox, digital detox that people talk about?
First, I also want to say that I don't think a digital detox is a bad thing. I think it can be really useful to take a step back and really consciously use these tools less. But I know for so many people, they might do the digital detox and then find themselves returning to those same habits of screen time. So what I really try to do differently in this book is not give a 10-step plan for how you can fix your relationship with social media, right? Because it's going to be different for everybody. But what I really endeavored to do is offer a set of creative prompts to help people explore, express, and come to their own personal definition of what it could mean to have a conscious relationship with social media. So the way the book is structured is we go through different chapters with themes like attention, productivity and urgency, privacy, fear and disinformation. And there's creative prompts to explore kind of all of these different themes. But in the end of each chapter, there's some repeated prompts. And in the very last chapter of the book, readers are guided in taking those reflections from each chapter and distilling them into a personal statement. So using all of the art and writing that they've done throughout the workbook to craft their own, what I call a gentle manifesto. So that is a personal statement of what well-being could mean and how we want to treat ourselves when we're stuck in this really sticky conversation. So essentially, it's less about finding the one hack that works and more about learning a set of creative tools to stay in conversation with ourselves and create or author a personal definition of what well-being could mean when we choose to be online.
So what role does creativity play in forming a conscious relationship with social media?
I think creativity is one of our most valuable allies when it comes to caring for our mental health in general. Something I often say is that words can feel really limiting. And for a lot of us, being in the cognitive or analytical part of our mind doesn't help us get to the root of what is painful or what we're struggling with. I know for myself, I can really think my way out of a lot of things. But when I sit down with painting or with drawing or even just writing, kind of free writing and poetry, I'm often surprised by what comes out, right? It kind of bypasses what I already know to be true and makes it possible for me to maybe even learn something new about what I'm experiencing. And I think the other thing about creativity is it allows us to imagine a different future, right? It's an inherently creative act to imagine a different possibility for how we might like to move through our lives or how a relationship could be different. So, not only is it kind of an expanded tool belt for how we might express and get to know ourselves, but also I think is really the foundation of how we might move into a different era of our lives where something could be different than it is in the present.
How important is that? One of the things I really appreciate about your book is you talk about the burnout scale, and I'd love for you to share that
Mm.
with our listeners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, burnout, I think is really misunderstood. We're seeing a lot of conversations about burnout in the zeitgeist right now, and I think that's a great thing. But maybe I'll give an example of a workshop I was running. I was doing a workshop with a group of doctors and nurses, and we were talking about the definition of burnout, which is not actually what most people expected it to be. It's the point of maybe our empathy is decreased. Maybe it feels harder and harder to kind of reach our benchmarks for accomplishment. We feel emotionally exhausted. So we were looking at that definition of burnout, and someone in this group commented, "Okay, if that's the definition of burnout, then every doctor and nurse I know meets the criteria." And the group laughed because that rang true, but then they also stopped laughing. Right? I think we think about burnout as the crisis point or the boiling point when you've gone so far beyond your capacity that you need to take a full break, or there's some crisis unfolding in your life and you require professional help to get back to a place that feels good and functional. When actually burnout, I think, happens way earlier on the scale. So the activity in the book that you're talking about asks the readers to think about burnout in terms of a scale of 1 to 10. Maybe 1 is where we're functioning at our most optimal, most regulated. 10 would be the absolute crisis point. And so looking at each individual place on the scale, what does a 1 look like? How do you know in your body, in your interactions, in your digital habits when you're at a 1? How do you know when you're at a 10? But then importantly, looking at what would a 6 look like on that scale? So not fully in crisis mode, but at a place where perhaps you still have the ability to make a different choice or seek help or make a change. And I think getting to know the personal signs of when we're in that warning zone at a 6 out of 10 is helpful because it means that we have the literacy and I think the self-understanding to make changes before we get to a point where it's kind of too late.
So, how do the prompts in your book help people process emotions related to their online experiences?
Hmm. I think one of the things I'm most proud of in the book is what a range of types of prompts there are. Everything from journaling questions to reflect on their responses to certain ideas, but then also places that really just invite visual expression without needing to plan out the final outcome or know the answer. And I think within that, when we allow ourselves to create with invitations or prompts like that, it gives us a space to practice, again, not being the expert, not knowing the answer, and being gentle with ourselves, seeing what emerges. And I think that's the exact same skill that we can bring to our attitudes towards digital wellness, right? Getting to explore as we go and try out different things to see what works for us instead of needing to get it perfect on the very first try. And that's really the philosophy behind art therapy, right? It's much more about how the process feels than how the finished product looks. So I've really tried to bring that ethos into the prompts in this book so that there's lots of spaces within the book for readers to write and draw and cut and add their own images to get to have that imperfect exploration for themselves.
There's so many great resources in this book. That's one of the things I love is there are many different approaches that you have. So people can do the writing and the cutting and creating as they are going through their own experience within this book.
And I think that's another important piece too, is to have those places to stop and integrate. Like there's big chunks of text where we talk about, the history, the social implications, the political implications. And then there are these points to pause and really integrate what you're thinking about, what you're learning, and get to move your hands and do something visual while you really digest those conversations for yourselves.
For those growing up online, what are some of the just things that we need to be aware of and I guess have some more compassion for because it's so different than when I was growing up?
I mean, gosh, it's such a good question. This is something I think about a lot as well. And I'm glad that you bring the word compassion into this because it's really challenging. It's really challenging to grow up online with a distinct lack of privacy, with our attention pulled in many directions. And, like we discussed before, I think having an awareness that if we struggle with these tools, it's not necessarily all on us, right? It's not all our fault if we're struggling to use tools that are designed to addict us. So I think having that awareness that we're trying to do something hard by maintaining our mental health in a space that isn't necessarily conducive to positive emotions. So I think just that gentleness and looking upstream at who benefits from our doom scrolling is one piece. And I think another piece that feels really important when it comes to the idea of kind of spending our lives in digital space is knowing that we can change the rules for ourselves at any point. What works for us in one era of our lives might not for the next. I mean, one anecdote I could think of is the first time I moved into an apartment that was all my own. I had big ideas about how I was going to finally control my screen time. I decided that, okay, my bedroom is going to be a place that I don't look at my phone. So I literally took like a roll of red electrical tape and kind of marked off a square on my floor to designate like this is the space that I won't use social media. And like that hack I think worked for a week or two, but then I got the flu a couple of weeks later and really needed some passive entertainment while I was recovering in bed. So I think a gentleness that our strategies can change and will evolve as we need different things, but also as the technologies get more powerful or as we learn to use them in different ways. So I think, again, an attitude of compassion that this is not something we're going to find a singular solution for that works the rest of our lives, and being willing to offer ourselves that grace as our needs change and as our relationship with these technologies changes.
Well, you have a whole chapter on comparison and worthiness, which I felt was so important because how often do we see, and you use these examples? She's on a mountaintop with her rescue dog, and they're having another 6-figure month. And so we're hearing these things going, well, what's going on with me? I don't have that going on,
It's so challenging, right? And on a cognitive level, I think we all know that when we see other people's posts on social media, we're seeing the curated version of their lives at its very best. But it's also so exhausting to be scrolling through a feed and just seeing example after example of other people getting it right. And I'm doing air quotes there. It's really hard to feel good about ourselves when we are just subjected to just a torrent of other people's definitions of success or evidence that they're getting it right, and perhaps by comparison we're getting it wrong. So one of the prompts in that chapter is to do a case study on someone that we perceive as being better off than us or that we might feel jealous of, and getting really curious about, well, first of all, what don't we see of their lives online? What might they be thinking of as they curate this online persona? what might be hard for them, really trying to perceive that person on the other side of the screen as a whole person and doing the same for ourselves, right? I think the comparison also goes both ways. We compare ourselves to both other people that we see online, but also to ourselves, who we've been in the past, what we've put of ourselves online maybe years ago. That's another challenging place to reckon with, I think, when the internet preserves kind of an archive of everything we've ever posted or everything that's ever been published about us.
Well, and another thing I think of is like how much of that is true. I mean, how much of it is
Mhm.
actually we look at fact versus fiction and what are we really consuming here?
Right. It's harder and harder to discern truth from fiction, from opinion. I don't know if you've tried out that quiz that asks you to determine real images from AI images, but it's getting harder and harder, even since just writing this book in the last few years. It's much more challenging to determine truth from something that's been fabricated. And that's really disorienting as well, right? It's hard to feel a sense of groundedness in digital space when we can't even get our bearings around what's trustworthy.
So, with all that in mind, how do people develop this sense of enoughness then?
I think that's such an important question. Enoughness is really at the core of a lot of what I wanted to explore in the art of thriving online. I think what it comes down to is really being in touch with ourselves and asking, like, what are my own metrics of enough or success, and having that articulated before we go into digital space, right? If for me, what feels like success is, having enough time to take my dog for a walk for an hour a day, or having close connections with my friends who live down the street, or maybe it's even something like having enough money to cover my basic needs. If that is my personal definition of enoughness, having that articulated for myself so that when I go into social media and see all of these other examples of what success could look like, I can remind myself, like, okay, yeah, that is this person's definition, or that is something that's being sold to me. But what I really want to ground in is what gives my life meaning, what makes me feel the most well, the most connected, the most like myself.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I think that's so important, and it's a very interesting landscape we traverse when we were talking about social media. In your book, you share so many examples that are creative of exercises that people can do. What is one that's had a real impact on you?
Well, I think going back to your last point, there's one activity about creating personal metrics of success. So, I mean, there's so many things that we learn to count, right? Like the number in our bank account, or the the vanity metrics of followers on social media. Those can be really external definitions of success. But one of the invitations is to think about other things that you might count in your life that serve as evidence that you're really living in alignment with yourself. So maybe it's the number of coffee mugs beside your reading chair, the number of bedtime stories you read to your kid, thinking of something personal that serves as kind of a little case study or proof that you're in connection with yourself and living into your values, and actually making a punch card out of that. So there's a template in the book where you can write down whatever that metric is going to be, cut it out, and actually carry it with you so that when you notice, like, oh, there's another bedtime story read, there's another coffee mug, or whatever that habit is going to be, you can actually punch it in real time and carry that around with you as a physical reminder.
So, what are some of the key benefits of staying connected online while maintaining a very conscious awareness of its impact?
The first place my mind goes is my best friend lives in another city on the other side of the continent. I think one of the real gifts of social media and digital tools is that we can maintain relationships in a way that might have been more challenging pre-social media or pre-internet. I think another benefit is that social media allows us to find people who are like us. There's things I think that we carry around with a lot of stigma, and something that's amazing about the internet is we can actually find the communities of people who maybe have the same experience. Another example in my life is that I didn't realize I had ADHD until I spent some time on TikTok. I know that's a really classic story for a lot of people, but it was the vulnerable sharing of other people, especially women, in their experiences of neurodivergence that started to make me feel less alone. Like when people would share, I had this experience or this thing has been tough for me, it was really validating and actually made it possible, one, for me to feel like I could belong in that community, but that also that there was support, maybe in ways that I wasn't finding in my in-person relationships. So I think oftentimes, in the best case scenario, we can find safety and support and community when those things might not be available in our local area. So we can maintain relationships in a way that is fairly easeful. We can also discover new facets of our identity or discover support or engage in activism in ways that is pretty astounding. Like those are the gifts I think of the digital age that I don't want to throw away just because there's also really challenging things about how these apps are designed and how we interact with them.
There's so many positive aspects to it as well as negative. I think the thing that I am taking away from your book, it's really looking at how we can discern, the
Mm.
positive and the negative, and then also looking at how we can really kind of set boundaries within our social media use so it's not out of control.
I think that's really the intention. I don't think we're ever going to come to one clean, perfect answer about whether the internet or whether social media is good or bad for us. It's always going to be this paradox. And that's challenging, right? Holding two truths simultaneously. I mean, that's often the work that we do in therapy, right? Is letting two things be true at once. And if we're doing that, if we're holding that our time online is meaningful and valuable and useful, and at the same time also has the potential to be harmful, then how we want to engage in those spaces, what boundaries preserve the meaning and usefulness, but also protect us from the places that it might be detrimental to our mental health.
What would you like readers and our listeners to take away from your book?
I think I'd really like people to take away a sense of hope. I think it can feel really defeating to try and untangle our relationships with social media and feel like we're stuck, right? Feel like we're really trapped in using a tool that maybe we don't want to, but feel like we don't have a choice about leaving. I think if if I can pass along anything is that I feel hopeful that we can find ways to coexist with these technologies and that there are strategies for navigating them in a way that honors what we need to feel well in the world, and that will change, right? And that will have to relearn those lessons over and over again. It's not a failure to have to start again or try something different, but I think what has been so important for me in my own evolving relationship with social media is just a fierce self-compassion that this is hard, right? That this is a really challenging thing to try and navigate and is only getting more and more challenging, as technology gets more and more advanced. So I think more than sorting out how exactly to navigate social media, I think what I really hope people take away from this book is some new tools for how to stay in empathetic, compassionate conversation with themselves as they hold perhaps a lifelong exploration of what it means to try and stay well when we choose to be online.
What advice would you like to offer our listeners that are wanting to create a healthier online experience today?
Oh my gosh, there's so many places to start. And maybe I'll just get really practical for a second. I think one thing that's really useful is finding a window of time or space in your day, whether that's first thing in the morning or before bed, maybe it's your lunch break, when you deliberately take time away from social media to do something creative, to connect back in with yourself. In my own life, that looks like taking time in the morning to read or to write. I know there's a really big difference for me when I start to scroll first thing or am inundated with news or other people's opinions, right when I wake up. So carving out time to protect those moments of being in reflection and expression with ourselves, I think is one of the most powerful things we can do to maintain a sense of wellness when we're online.
Well, Amelia, I just loved your book. I thought it was such a great resource. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Absolutely. So you can find me on social media at Art Therapy IRL. My website is arttherapyinreallife.com. And if anyone wants to kind of meet in community and have some time and some opportunities to connect with other people who are also really grappling with this conversation, I'm going to be running a workshop for anyone who pre-orders the book. And I also run drop-in open studios twice a week on themes like resisting hustle culture, being compassionate to ourselves, resisting perfectionism. So all the kinds of themes that come up in the book. I make sure there's lots of opportunities for folks to come and do some group therapeutic art if that would feel supportive.
Well, Amelia, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me and stewarding this conversation. I really appreciate getting to be here and chat with you.
Well, thank you, Amelia. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your book, The Art of Thriving Online. The Art of Thriving Online is available to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. You can also purchase this book directly from the publisher, Sounds True, at soundstrue.com. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.